Well, we're moving forward in our video series, ESG, Acronym to Action. And today we're going to discuss transitional energy strategy, something that's very sort of near and dear to my heart. And I really want to take some time to discuss it with you and show what the whole concept behind transitional energy strategy is. It's something that's becoming very critical in our operations these days. And so let's discuss it today. I've been in the oil and gas business or energy related field for over 3 decades of my life. And so I have definitely seen transition in the energy industry, but we're going to talk about the actual strategy and concepts behind it. So what is it? Well, Wikipedia defines transitional energy, as the ongoing process, and emphasis on ongoing process, of replacing fossil fuels with low carbon energy sources. And it's a significant structural change in an energy system regarding supply and consumption. Okay, let's discuss the first 3 words: ongoing process. So what we're seeing right now is, as our society begins to transition from hydrocarbon-based and carbon energy-based systems, which we've had for many years, these decades actually, towards more sources of renewable energy, this is a transitional period. It is definitely a process. It's an ongoing process, and we have to realize this. Often we believe that we can make these quantum leaps from A to Z, but we can't if we're not doing it properly with strategy and well thought out plan and vision for how we're going to transition our operations between these 2 things. So this is very critical that we remember that this is an ongoing process. You'll remember in the first video we talked about arming ourselves with information and how critical that is to our internal teams, but also to external stakeholders. Well, this is one of those places. As we begin to make this transition, we have to be able to arm ourselves with the information that we need that's going to allow us to make an effective and efficient and an economic transition. So we're replacing fossil fuels, okay, with low carbon energy sources. Well, what does that mean, replacing fossil fuels? Well, here's the thing. GM and Volvo and the big companies, and you can list many of them, are changing over their engines now to, instead of being able to run on internal combustion, which is going to be with diesel or obviously with gasoline, they're wanting to go to electricity. Great. That's fantastic. The cars look really cool. They look kind of space age, and they got fancy lights and screens and all that kind of stuff. That's fantastic. But here's the deal. If your electricity is still operating on a coal-based system, you have a problem. Okay? Because if you're supplying your electricity with coal, well, sure, your engine in your electric car is not actually producing emissions, or very, very little. Well, the problem is, to get the car to produce very little emissions, you're utilizing coal, which, as we know, despite the fact that we hear about clean burning coal, it is not an energy source that we're going to be able to continue to use if we want to truly make the transition. So where do we see this going? Well, we're turning some of our power plants, or we should be turning all of our power plants, over from coal to natural gas. This is a transition. This is part of the ongoing process. We're not immediately replacing coal with a wind system, which may or may not provide the power that we need. We may not be changing our coal-fired plant over to solar, okay, which we know has all kinds of issues, and we'll discuss those, despite the fact that it's becoming more prevalent and a lot more economic. So what we see here is it's a transition from a coal-based electricity grid over to a natural gas-based energy grid. And the natural gas-based energy grid is going to give 50% less emissions than the coal-fired plant. To me, that's a huge transition. It's also part of an ongoing process. When we now take wind energy, and we combine that with a natural gas power plant, now we have tremendous efficiency, huge reduction in emissions, and now we have the transitional power grid that takes us from where we were to where we need to be, to ultimately the future where we may not be having carbon or hydrocarbon-based substances at all, trying to help us with power. You know, I've thought about this a lot. Imagine back in the 1800s when oil began to first be discovered in North America and around the globe. Imagine at that point in time, there was probably the anti-oil movement that said, this thing is never going to work. You're never going to be able to get oil out of the ground. That's ridiculous. Let's keep hunting whales, okay? And we'll use the whale oil to light our lamps, which they literally did, the 1800s, early 1900s. So again, we're thinking about oil as a standalone thing. We have to realize that throughout history, there have been obviously the naysayers about oil too, because at the time it just seemed like too complicated of a thing. Well, now obviously we know the impact that it's had on our environment and on our world. So we now know, we've defined a bit what transitional energy is. Let's move into what renewable energy is. So renewable energy is energy that's collected from renewable resources that are naturally replenished on sort of a human time scale. And so that's sunlight, there's wind, there's movement of water, geothermal heat. All these are considered to be renewable energy sources. We don't do anything as human beings to control the sun or control the wind or the movement of water. So that's where it becomes naturally renewable. So it's important to realize we're moving from transitional energy strategy, integration of some renewables in with natural gas, for instance, or hybrid cars, or ensuring that the grid that we're working off of for electrical cars is not in fact powered mostly by coal-fired electricity. So when we talk about transitional energy, we also have to look at our various systems, and we have to take stock of the environmental footprint, if any. Now, I can tell you that in Alberta, where we're bringing this to you from, we're phasing out coal here 100% by the end of 2023. That's the goal. Now, we know that in the US, they still receive 20% of their energy from total coal production. And sometimes in different areas, and we call it the coal belt in the United States, where the coal lobby is very strong, there's places where 20% is very low. It's actually far higher than that. So again, let's look at the first statement. We have to take a look at our various systems, and we must take stock of the environmental footprint if there is any. Well, if we go and now we look at the fact that we're going to phase out coal, this is very positive. Alberta, Western Canada, and even Eastern Canada has vast amounts of natural gas. So that's fairly simple simple may be the wrong word, but it's very doable to be able to combine the wind energy, for instance, solar energy, with a natural gas source and create the transitional energy supply that now can move us to the next step as we begin to develop out the renewables. But when you're still getting 20% of your energy from coal, or perhaps even higher in different jurisdictions, well, that's a footprint. Okay, that's a definite environmental footprint that needs to be looked at. And as much as we know that coal has been something that sustained our economy and it's supplied a lot of jobs, there's opportunities to transition people into a different way of looking at our power grid and our energy structure. And it must start with eliminating the coal-based fired plants and replacing those with natural gas as the start of the transition. So our largest energy supply, and this has changed really even in the last 5 to 10 years, this wasn't even the case a decade or so ago, but now we see that the largest energy supply in general comes from natural gas, which, as I've said before, produces far less emissions than coal. It's far more efficient, abundant, and less footprint. And also, as I'm sure you're well aware, the environmental footprint is very critical with coal. We can gasify deep coal, That's something that's a very, very exciting technology that can be looked at to gasify the coal in place and actually not mine it, but gasify it in place and be able to provide energy that way. But we also know that historically coal mining has taken a toll on the environment with strip mining and deep pit mining and different ways of getting the coal out of the ground. It has obviously left a pretty significant environmental impact. So it's a transitional mix of renewables and natural gas for peak usage. Well, that means that less gas is used, okay? And then there's less emissions. It's increased efficiency and economics for power plants and for integrating renewables. That's a huge, huge step forward. And as I mentioned before, solar is starting to come down. We see that the price, I should say solar pricing is coming down. It's becoming more economic to utilize solar in our operations combined with a robust natural gas strategy. For sure, wind and natural gas have been a partnership that's worked very, very well now for the last several years. And so we see that companies and communities are beginning to change their philosophy of operating, and this is a really exciting time. It's an exciting time to be in the transitional energy space. Another huge, huge component, especially in areas of high and relatively deep oil and gas production, is the superheated water that comes down in these deep wells. It's often coming out at very, very high temperatures, and that heat can be utilized as a power source for being able to generate power, even just to run operations, but especially in remote areas, if you can be off grid because you're utilizing geothermal heat as an energy source, this is a big, big step forward in the transitional energy strategy. And what in the end, what it really does, it helps us have a practical way of bypassing the old coal-fired grid-based systems wherever possible. And it is going to go a long, long way to reducing our dependency on hydrocarbons and the emissions that come from that. I'm just going to lay out a few sort of practical examples because ESG acronym to action, well, we need some action. And so this is something that comes from an oil and gas operation, but I'll sort of explain as well how this can be applied to industrial processes. So we have in oil and gas wells what we call casing gas or waste gas that's downhole in the well. Well, that actually can bring free energy to our operations. It's not a new technology. It's being developed and being refined quite a bit over the last few years. But casing gas is found downhole, and you can bring up significant enough volumes from that to run the engines for your pump jacks, okay? It's not substantial enough necessarily to warrant selling it into the natural gas transmission lines. But if you can take natural gas that really is just sort of wasted and turn that into the ability to run your engines on site with something that's a waste product or junk, then obviously this is a real step forward in transitioning. Imagine if we were able to transition the grid-based pump jack systems and transmission systems that we have into something that was being powered by really something we have downhole already. So often, and certainly you can see sometimes at nighttime in areas that are high in natural gas or oil production, you see the big flare stacks and you see basically we're burning money. That's really what it is. And so there's no revenue generation, there's huge emission issues and air pollution, obviously, when things are being flared. And that's not just in the oil and gas business. Often you see in energy systems that are for industrial use, you see flare stacks sometimes, certainly in municipal water treatment and waste treatment plants. There's often huge flare stacks going off. Well, there's ways that we can take that energy and utilize that for something good instead of literally sending the profits up in smoke, literally and figuratively. So this is something that we can take a look at. Like I said, it's not just necessarily the oil and gas industry, but it's taking a practical look at something that's really considered to be waste or garbage or whatever term you want to throw at it, but we can turn that into a resource. We can turn that into, in fact, a co-resource to what we're creating, what the main source of revenue or income is. So at a minimum, we know that when we integrate this kind of program into our operations, we're going to be knocking down our operating costs, which obviously is a huge thing to the bottom line. We're going to be reducing our greenhouse gases exponentially, because now there's not the issues in terms of flaring and pumping this stuff and just letting it go to atmosphere. And the installation is very simplistic. It's not complicated, it's not complex. But imagine if we started to turn all these operations into the ability to run the engines without having to rely on the power grid or on oil-based fuels. Now, there, as I've said at the end here, I mean, there literally is hundreds and thousands of these pump jacks out there in industry. Now, here's another way of integrating transitional energy structure, and it's something that I am very familiar with because we used it. So, and I do know that it works, and that's redundant or non-system critical solar. Okay, so one of the ways of doing that is to integrate solar panels into your field operations, whether that be, like I say, in oil and gas, but this can be farming, this can be agriculture, this can be mining. Many different operations integrate field instrumentation, field instrumentation, and the ability to be able to access data and control data sets and minor operations. So why I say redundant and non-system critical is because obviously solar energy it can be a very reliable source of energy, but it also, as we're well aware, can come to the point where there's not enough power. And so you can't be running system critical where there could be a spill or there could be an environmental issue. If the power goes down, we have to have all those backup systems in place, and obviously most industrial processes do that. But why not look at integrating some solar into there, because obviously your power costs now are zero. And when you have instrumentation running all day long out in the field, it uses up power. And so obviously there's ways of integrating that in where it becomes far less damaging and more critical to the operations. So when you need to have 24-hour daily operations that have to be relied on for safety, obviously you want to combine that with a electrical grid that's going to be reliable. But if you can build in a backup solar, this is a huge, huge opportunity. So what I want to discuss with you now is the fact that as we move through the energy space, the problem that we often see is that the public, rightly or wrongly, wants immediate action. They want us to take immediate action to make change. And so if we don't do that, then obviously that's going to upset a certain part of the population. And when we begin to integrate a transitional energy structure into our industrial operations, there's also the side that says, well, you know, this isn't going to work, and this is going to take too long, it's going to cost too much money. Well, again, like I say, there was a time in history where people said, forget about drilling an oil well, we need to just keep hunting whales, okay? Because that's going to keep powering up our lamps on our streets. So I think what we need to really realize is that this is something that needs to become part of our operations, and we really need to, remember, ingrain this into our corporate DNA. We have to make a conscious decision that says, we're doing this, and we're moving forward. And we are going to be able to tell the naysayers, nope, It's not going to be more expensive. In the long run, this is going to save us a lot of money. It's going to impact our bottom line. It's going to make us better corporate citizens, and it's going to be allowing us to be more economic and more efficient. And here's the data. Here's the information. Remember we talked about that? Information is so critical in now getting the message out. And then it also, if we imprint it on our DNA, we can now say to those that say you're not fast enough, you're not doing this, we need to just, close everything down that's hydrocarbon related and run off the sun, okay? The point in a lot of that is that the solar industry and the wind industry and the hydrogen industry, all these people, when they're serious about it, and there's amazing, amazing work being done right now in the renewable space and non-traditional carbon-based fuels and energy. Huge opportunities now in Canada and North America and throughout the world to make real, lasting, long-term change. But the vast majority of scientists and engineers and people that are involved in this side of the business are very well aware that it can't happen tomorrow. And so, we're working towards it. It's something that we continue to strive for and work hard towards. And that's why transitional energy strategy is so critical in terms of ESG. In the environmental side, but often it's very clear that governance is also changing around. Governments are creating far more structure, infrastructure, rules and regulations, and so we need to be on top of that. And obviously the social impact is going to be huge. If people are used to seeing the flare stack going off at night and they can see it from miles around, and now we're able to turn that into something positive instead of flaring up all that natural gas, well, that's going to have an impact on our communities, and it's going to help people to see that we are working towards it. So when we make the decision that we are going to be involved in ESG, we're going to be involved in transitioning from where we were to where we need to be, this has to be a definitive decision. The team has to buy in. We have to move in this direction and know that we're moving forward in a way that's going to allow us to impact our bottom line. It's going to allow us to impact our communities, and it's going to allow us to impact our operations for good, not just now, but into the future. And I think that's also another part of the information. We got to get this right. So we got to think about the future here. And so when we're discussing our strategy, and there's those that don't think we're doing this quick enough, we have to make sure that we arm ourselves with the information to let them know that we are working on it. We are doing the transitional things that need to happen because we have to get it right this time. We don't have another opportunity to go to and fro on what we're going to do with energy. We need to make those conscious decisions right now. Been great talking to you about the environment, transitional energy structure. In our next set of videos, we're going to start going into the S of ESG. So we're going to talk about social action. Look forward to seeing you in the next video.